All right. I think we're live. Cool, cool, cool. So, welcome to, I guess like this is like the last session in my time zone, but also it's very interesting for me because this is way past my bedtime. But my name is Lou. I'm very happy to join the BeMore Festival and host this session about design maturity and how we help the legacy organizations to grow their design capability. And of course, like probably let's start from like a self-introduction. Like all the McKinsey folks, I prepared like some PowerPoints to introduce myself. So who's Lou, right? Like I started, I got born in Chengdu, China, which is like the hometown of both red pandas and giant pandas. They're basically like my favorite animals, as you know, and red panda is basically my spirit animal. And then I went to St. John's University in Minnesota, studied rhetoric, which basically how people get influenced by messages. Of course, I didn't learn how to convince people. I just know why they get convinced, which is not very useful. And then I got into marketing and learned how to actually think about the persuasion in society. Switched my career to product development design at Carnegie Mellon, a pretty renowned university known for human computer interactions and a bunch of other stuff. Also known for a bunch of startups, right? Very innovative. And then I ended up at McKinsey and Company, which is a management consulting, maybe some of you will know. What's interesting about the company is also like I joined at the time when they just start their design practice, like organically grow within the company. So around for about like 7 years, we're actually trying to figure out what exactly are the things we can help the client, especially from the design lens, in addition to the more traditional business and strategy side. Well, what's next? I don't know, but we probably can figure it out together, like throughout discussion. And I think like our plan is let's probably I will try to spend about like 20 minutes to talk about some of the content and introduce my experience. And we'll love to open to the floor and trying to answer some questions to make it more interactive. So what do I do? Most of the time, if you think about the consulting firm, a lot of the times like we're trying to choose like a sector to focus on. I think design is quite different when I starting to grow a little more tenured. So my sector is called JAM. Sounds pretty fancy. I help like drive digital transformations for many of the large organizations, especially in energy, agriculture. So how we describe it is like we deal with energy, food, and materials. So there are some examples of things what we do is like for example, I used to help like a large gas company to reimagine the planning and scheduling. And in order, after we do that, we basically save them about like 10 to 20 million every year from their operation costs to make it more efficient. I also help like a North America utility leader to redesign its customer portal, especially during the COVID time. So we effectively supported the low income customers, avoid them from, like getting into debt and then get cut power, trying to support them and check their eligibility and all the other different ways in order to, making sure that they get power. And of course, like at the agriculture side, I also had some experience doing like, how can we encourage the farmers to think about new ways of farming and then build like a carbon credit business from that. So as you can see, like design can actually do a lot of things within these end-to-end approach to help large organizations actually drive value and impact. So, thinking about the topic we're trying to talk about today, how to help the legacy organization build design capability. One of the key things here is that what exactly is the challenge? And in one sentence, I always like share with folks is that the consumer digital experience is actually the thing that really change people's life every day. But on the other hand, like if you think about all the industry workers and customers who are using utilities, they're also using Google, Amazon, Uber during their daily life for other activities. So it feels really awkward that while they're enjoying the top tier digital experience, all the convenience, while using those digital products. And then if they need to deal with either like their working utility or their working agriculture, or they're being like they're paying their electricity bill, it started to feel like there's a digital divide. Why things are so hard here? Why can't they be another Google? And that really encouraging all the I will say like energy and jam organization to think about how can we also catch up with this trend, especially for many of them. If you think about they exist for more than 100 200 years, right? Like many of the companies I know and I used to serve, they started when Thomas Edison started their own company. So that's kind of an interesting topic. How can we help them? Exactly. So how do we help? I think the first thing that we have to admit is that design can never stand alone. Because a lot of the times that when we're trying to chat with the CXOs, right, like the C-suite leadership about design, they don't understand. Like design is never really part of their language, especially for many of the more traditional industry, right? Like as you can see, when we're talking about design, most of the time the reaction would be, "Oh, cool. Uh, like let's can you create me like a good dashboard, right? So I can check the data." One of the examples I remember is that even like when we start to work with some of the leaders in the field, sometimes the leader is like, "So I understand all you're saying, but I just don't know how much value we can get from like a pretty interface." And I was like, "Oh God, you're not getting it." So that's the reason why many of the time we have to blend design into many of the larger scale initiatives, like when we're chatting with the C-suite leadership about the design-led digital transformation, which we can talk a little bit more about it, right? One of the things is that how can we connect value with this transformation, especially when we're thinking about um, how design can help to redefine the problem. So to look for more areas that can generate value, how design can help the implementation, and how design can actually help adoption for the user to actually being able to use the product smoothly. Otherwise, like if we even create like the digital investment, nobody's using it, you're still not, like making money. So I think like at McKinsey, we actually have like this framework called DDD. It's called like Discover, Design, Deliver. It's a pretty straightforward framework. And then many of you probably are familiar with like the IDEO five-step process: empathize, define, ideate, etc. We're actually trying to take it like a one step back and from a higher level, and not just thinking about design, but also thinking about any type of digital product and service development. So the DDD process really encouraging people, especially the senior leaderships within those legacy company, to think about you have to first define the problem. You have to discover, do user research, do tech discovery, and trying to do like a business case deep dive, thinking about all the value drivers. Because a lot of the time, they quickly zoom into one of the areas and then really ignore a bunch of other potential areas that probably contain more value. And then we switch to design. So this might sound a little confusing, but actually design here really means that not only about concepting, right, but also like with these concepts, how can we even understand what are we building with some of the metrics from viability and also business impact? What we're trying to really do here is being able to think about not only the concept, but also what's the framework that we can help the client to prioritize all these features with the tech feasibility and business value, so that we're always value driven, and then this story can be smoothly translated to the senior leadership's mindset. Otherwise, nobody is sponsoring it. And of course, like deliver is probably the most straightforward piece here, as like we were trying to design and develop in the agile framework, trying to iterate, conduct like continuous user testing, and also blending in change management, adoption, training, external communication, etc. So as you can see, like the DDD model is really a pretty robust model. We're constantly educating our clients organization to think about what will be a best practice template they can use or leverage immediately to drive for what we call like a high performing digital product and service development process. So from here, like many of us starting to talk about like how about build like an internal design team along the way, right? Because if you think about like many of the companies, especially legacy organizations, they never even thought about like build their internal digital or design team. Probably most of the time, what they have is enterprise technology, and if they need design, well, actually, if they need new product, they probably think about like out of the box solution, right? I'm gonna buy SAP, I'm gonna buy some of the other Oracle solution, and just jigger them together. And that results in that probably it's not specifically customized for my end user group. And also there's a lot of band-aid among like these fragmented system. So that's the reason why during the DDD process, when we're trying to help the organization to probably go through a couple journeys led by McKinsey talents, we're also trying to help them build an internal design team if they don't have one, or scale the one they already have. As you can see, like there are a couple of things that we really feel like that can help. The first one is we want to make sure that using this design team establishment process, we're trying to establish this very robust user-centric design process. This is not just for the design team, but also there's a lot of knowledge that can be radiated to the other parts of the organization. Thinking about um, not only IT, but also like business units. And also, of course, like as we talked about, we're able to customize anything based on the specific org needs. One of the example I have experienced is that we started with some of the high impact operation business units or journeys. For example, like field execution, which can save them probably 20, 30 millions a year. Uh, use that pattern. Actually, many of the business leaders start to think about, oh, this can be used at my team as well. So, for example, some of the financial department, finance department will reach out, the supply chain department will reach out saying, hey, what can you guys do for us? As you can see, you start to create like a internal contact point for many of these business leaders to look for this new and innovative way to help them capture value. You can't really do that without an internal design team. So that's one of the core thing that it's not only about creating value, radiate knowledge, but even like this is like a way for the digital capability to think about how can I create a pipeline that can constantly help us to create a roadmap. So from there, like the process what we talk about is, oops, sorry, one second. So there are a couple of things, right? As we mentioned, um, needs to happen. So basically, I summarize in the 5 steps that needs to happen in order to create or build the design capability. We talk about like the robust design process, which is based on the foundational 3D model, the discover, design, deliver. We're trying to making sure that this double, triple diamond mindset is kind of like implemented within this framework. So probably many of you already know about like the diverge, converge concept. And then for each of these, we'll have like exploratory research to synthesis, brainstorm, and then concepting, and then eventually there's like user testing, design exploration, implement design. Using this visual is actually quite effective. As you can see, people are mostly like visual animals. So if you share this with many of the business leaders, they're like, oh, right. It's kind of like similar as some of the problem solving sessions they have, right? Like the root cause analysis is just like not as robust because a lot of the time they're just go with the flow. But having this framework is really going to help not only designers, but also business leaders and also the business analysts and team. So of course, like having a robust design process is basically the foundation of having the team. Typically, we can even build this without having like too many of the members. And the second level is really about like how can we get the right level of early design talent? There are different schools of thoughts, and I can just give you guys an example here. Typically, how we think about it is it might be easier to start with some of the tenured individual contributors to be able to pick up work immediately, leveraging the robust design process. And then we will start to get in a head of design to help manage this group of people and trying to shape this in a way so it's more independent. And of course, like later, when this team start to scale a little bit more, based on the head of design's preference, we can start to actually slice and dice the team to include more diverse and focused expertise. So, for example, like we can have research ops, design, system team, and also the different service line, portfolio-based service line designers. Of course, like this is just like one way of doing it. I also see like some of the other school as like we first get like a head of design, so that person will be the one really thinking about how he or she or they can shape this community from the beginning. But the con obviously will be like the productivity at the very beginning will be a little less. Especially like probably this head of design will need to manage many contractors for a period of time before they have like full-time employees. So we talked about like talents, we talked about like the process. Another thing that probably when we start to scale a little bit more is really wanted to establish the design culture. And obviously there are like three key things here we want to talk about, right? The first one is the growth of the team and the growth of everyone on the team, individuals. So one key things here is like how can we establish the cadence for the growth focus one-on-one so the head of design or the design leader is able to help every individual to define um, the metrics for growth as well as development activities. And this is very key because a lot of the time that if you feel like someone is not really making progress, it might also be like we don't really have a clear plan. And it's the head of design's responsibility to help define that plan. And of course, like the community is very critical as like how can we create a supportive community so that the designers within this organization don't really feel like they're working silo, especially in this early stage industry. Probably one designer will need to be able to take like an end-to-end journey by themselves. So how can we making sure like we're having group critiques, we're having some of the design community meetings, so that everybody can share what are the challenges, what are the learnings, and feel being supported. And of course, like we shared earlier about like radiation, how can we radiate knowledge, making sure like what we learned can also be passed to other roles like product owners, tech leads, scrum masters, and even like the business team members, so that they all start to shift their mindset from the more traditional way of thinking to a more design-led or exploratory user-centric view. I remember like one example is that at the very beginning of a study, it's very hard to describe that we're designed for the end user because for many of the engineers, those are just numbers. But at the end of the journey, we create like personas, we're trying to empathize with them, and you can see like the tech leader is asking, I understand your design, but is that really what Anna is looking for? And Anna is like one of the persona. That was like a really nice moment that we start to realize, this Anna image, right? This persona, this traits really blended in their mind, and then they're thinking from the user perspective. And I will say that that's definitely a win. And of course, like after that, what we're trying to really think about is for this head of design, how can we actually push this person up to making sure like they get a seat on the high table? And I'm not really being sarcastic, but if you think about most of the time for this legacy company, the head of design, even though it sounds like a head, is probably more likely a manager-ish role, just because of the way they structure the company. So how can we make sure like this head of design is being able to progress as well, so have more and more influence among the organization? So obviously, we want to set up the solid foundation, trying to keep scale the process, develop talent strategy, establish like clear career development. Because the clearer the paths are, like for the team, the easier for the head of design to scale and get more resources. And of course, like there has to be like a pathway upwards as well. How can we make sure like the head of design is actually connecting with the proper leaders, like VPs, SVPs of the business organizations, and trying to build the rapport, build a relationship with them so they have like this trust with this person. And also the brand, right? The credibility brand. Most of the time, if you think about like how senior leadership interact with each other, it's really about like trust and track record. So we talked a little bit about like step from 1 to 4. If the team can make till this point, it's already a pretty successful team. And if we can keep and want to move forward, right, like just keep moving, continue the design impact, one of the things that the design team and the leader needs to do is being able to tell the story right. And that's the reason why we're saying like it's aha, but more than aha. As like you see, like many of the designers when we're telling the stories, the focus is or more about like the eureka moment, like the aha moment, make things very exciting. But that's not enough when we want to push the head of design up, trying to speak the C-suite language, like we mentioned earlier at the beginning. We're making sure that while we're talking about the aha moment, the emotional, exciting part, we're also tie that very closely with the dollar impact, so that when we're telling the story, it's not only exciting but also makes sense, and also feel valuable. So that when the business leader are thinking about this, it's not only about like the story but also about ROI. And if we're doing this right, we can then typically move to step 5. We're building the design org, starting to think about what does that mean to have an organization-wide design system that probably can touch all different journeys, or and even like some of the other user experience elements like marketing, voice of tone, relations, etc. And also like we want to talk about like design ops and service line approach. How can we think about designer as a group of folks, like a portfolio-based talents, but also somewhat fungible. So we have more flexibility to plug in designers for all different type of activities and tasks. Especially if you think about, we have a designer who's very focused in customer experience. He, she, they should be able to get plugged into any type of tasks, from early stage exploration to roadmap creation to actual implementation. And then last but not least, one of the fun thing here is how can we even build more credibility in trying to transform the brand of this organization from a more traditional ops driven brand to a more, I will say, like design or innovation led brand, is to making sure like this head of design and the team is thinking about industrial design knowledge, like the thought leadership, publish articles, learnings to the public, to the industry, to the market. Think about like many of the like Think with Google blog, right? Like they influence a lot of folks, as well as like Uber constantly always like showcasing their use cases, their brand guidelines that actually influence a lot of other newer companies. How can we become one of them, probably in the industry? So that typically will eventually help this organization become like a quote unquote design led org. And obviously there's a lot more we can do, but typically like based on my experiences, if a company or a design team can reach stage 5, they will probably be one of the top 10% of the companies with design maturity around the world. And hopefully we will have more and more company like that. I know like we don't have too much time left, so we'll love to open questions to the floor. And feel free to ask me anything, even red pandas. Okay, say you're the solo designer of the team and you're relevant fresh to the design space. Okay, well, I guess like This question can be a little tricky, right? Because if you're relatively fresh in the design space and you're the solo designer on the team, you're basically facing two challenges. The first one is, do you even have a robust design process, right? Because if you don't, then you're a little it's a little hard for you to build credibility with the team member, and with especially with some of the other non-design background team member. So I guess like the first thing is really making sure like you're able to have a very confident expression about like what's the design process, how do you plan to go about it, and you should be able to educate your peers on that. And then once you have a pretty concrete foundation, the next step is really just trying to making sure that you're thinking about each activities and trying to not really compromise, but customize it for your team members. Which means like sometimes you will need to land in the middle ground. You're still trying to hold a high standard, but having some of the flexibility within will definitely make your team member feel much more comfortable because they feel like they're being respected. And this is also like a ramp up process for them to get into this new, like a new area of knowledge. Hope that answers the question. All right. You're in a field where design is an afterthoughts. Well, I mean, that's basically many fields. Yep. I think like Max, for this one, as we mentioned, we need to speak their language. So the easiest ways to think about is like in your field, what are some of the key value drivers? Like for example, you're talking about the binary defense. In a lot of the case that we need to think about when we're talking about value drivers, that's typically things from like if it's from like an operation perspective, poor design may lead to human error. What does that mean? Can we get some data to understand like what are some of the potential percentage of like these things might happen? It might means like slower operation time. It might means like a lot of different metrics. I think the first step for you is probably just trying to collect some of the metrics that you feel that can be influenced by design, and and basically trying to wave a story, thinking about that if we have better or usable product design, we probably we're probably able to improve the efficiency, make it much easier to use, make it dummy proof so there's no human error, which also means that there's going to be a better output either from a value perspective, from safety perspective, from a situational awareness perspective. I think it's really about like if you can convey the impact into something more tangible so that your leadership will understand where you're coming from. All right. Probably how does not have a design background. Yep. Well, okay, so this is a very interesting question because I actually have like very similar experience to help educate and coach some of the head design might not have like design background to be a good one. So I think like there are two ways to think about it. The first one is it's totally fine to have a team to have like the quote unquote head of design who is not coming directly coming from design background. And when we're talking about design background, there are also two things. The first one is a design practitioner background. The second one is like completely, like not familiar with design at all. If it's the former situation, that's probably okay because I know like many of the more strategic roles, they probably work with designers for a long time, but never being a practitioner. But they observed or get like enough reps to understand how design works. So even though they might not be able to do the hands-on work, they know what's good, what's bad, and they know how to work with designers and manage the team. So that's probably not like too big of an issue. But if the head of design is really have nothing to do with design and probably let's say coming from like a pure tech background or a pure like a project management background, then typically how we suggest is like there might be a dual leadership setup as the um, the one that is probably better at project and practice management become like a practice lead, and then you partner this person with a expert role to provide like a design specific insights. Typically, we see that two in the box model can work pretty well, as like you will still have a relatively senior IC to provide advice at the time, while like you have like this main person running this community, running this organization, thinking about resourcing, thinking about pipeline and roadmap. For product manager, though, I don't think product manager needs to have design background. This person just needs to be open-minded and know how to work with designer and just take their advice. I think it's more about like if this person is open-minded, respectful. If that's the case, that should be good. I don't think design background for product manager is necessary. All right. Yep, this is a good one. And this, I know, like this actually happen a lot of the times. Like when you have sometimes we saw like a leader know enough design to be dangerous, but not enough to be useful. So that that's like obviously like a pretty playful way to say it, but it's pretty painful if you're actually in this situation. So I will say that again, right? Like it's very important to tie the story back to value. So, and if you are able to create some pretty robust like link between design decisions and the value drivers for your target audience or target market, you can also use the same framework and try to test the idea with your business leaders by saying like, okay, so if you want to make this feature cool, can you justify your thoughts with this framework we all agreed on, right? Because I tried to do that so I can speak your language. Now you have to speak my language by going through this process. And of course, like if you have like a very assertive leader, that might be a pretty challenging process to educate them. But I will say that in that case, probably it's time to think about like, well, are there any better environment I can work in? All right. So this is an interesting question. Read True, thanks a lot for that. I will say that the first question is that really necessary if the organization is least bothered with UX? And the reason is because to be very honest with you, right? Like there are some organizations that can really survive or probably doing great without really thinking about design optimize the experience, right? Like some of the very old school, I know like data service or maybe like optimize their design can help a little bit, but it's not really going to change their revenue model. It's not going to stop them making money. I remember like once I was talking with my colleague or serving a client, they're saying like, can we think about modernize your platform, right? Like optimize your data structure. Their CEO is basically saying like, we're making like 40 million like annual revenue with like our shitty structure. Why bother? Well, I mean, if you really in that like pretty optimal situation, well, good for you. You probably don't need to do anything. And then eventually some disruptors will change the market and then you will start to feel the sense of urgency. But if the organization is truly least bothered with UX, or at least like US is not going to help, I feel like we probably need to rethink the angle. Maybe there's some specific area that we can improve. So again, right, like if we tie the value drivers to the specific area, that might be able to give you a good story. But I will say that we don't need to transform the organization for the sake of transform, right? Like we probably just need to find the meaningful area to tackle. All right. Oh, okay. Oh, this one is interesting. Yep. I was hired as the first UX leader. Yep. And Solon Polyco. Yeah, I think like this can be a little tricky as like if you're just getting in, then probably they used to have like some of the ownership structure from their BU, maybe like owned by some quote unquote system manager. I know it's a pretty dated word, but many organizations do have that. I will say that probably the first thing really is try to build some relationship with the existing owner of these website or assets. because it's critical to think about that. And this is actually a lot of times like probably consultants are pretty good at it. The first one is let's try to be friends and trying to set up like a trusted relationship. So maybe the leader who's actually currently owning many of the assets or product is a little bit concerned because you're new, and then they're like, "Are you going to take piece of my job? Like, what's your operation model?" So probably the first question is like, "Can I be friends with this person? Right? Can I understand what their concern?" And from there, if we build like a trusted relationship, we can start to talk about, "Hey, are you familiar with design? Right? Let me tell you like how I can help, right? Like what I can offer to make our team better." I feel like that's probably the easiest answer. I don't think there's like a specific formula here, but it's more about like relationship building, rapport building, and then leveraging your robust design and knowledge to convince this person. Think about like what's the output look like? What probably like we can, make a brand of the team. We can start to make some credibility, and then from there you should be able to have a pretty good track record. All right. Step mapping, we're trying to introduce new practices. Ah, yep. Jennifer, thanks a lot for this. I think it is interesting here because I will say that understand the stakeholder is typically the most challenging piece, right? Like you probably want I think like for me personally, I typically are trying to understand three things. The first one is like for these stakeholders, what are they working on? And then when we say what they're working on, not necessarily just their title, but actually probably we need to either talk with them or trying to find someone who knows their organization well. Because I know like many organization, the title doesn't really represent what this person is in charge of. They might be able to, they might be, in charge of like a lot of different things, and then with like a pretty outdated title. So that's the first thing. What do they really do? And then the second one is what are some of their concerns and what's their plan? Because the first thing to convince people is trying to understand where they stand and what they want. I think it's critical for us to see, like, for example, if someone's saying, like, I do have a plan, I have like a roadmap in my mind at how I want to grow my practice. If we know that, then we can probably think about the third thing is how can we actually provide our offer. I will say like just use this step process to think about like how do you want to understand the stakeholder, and then what type of angle you want to use to convince them. All right. Oh, interesting. UIX and company didn't have a strong design standard. Yep. Well, I mean, first, like, congrats, like, you have a team of 10 designers. That's awesome. That's actually a pretty, I would say, like, if you think about it, for many companies, that's actually a pretty solid team if you're not like a super design focused like company. I will say that probably when we're talking about strong design standard, there are actually three aspects of it. The first one, like we mentioned, is the process. So I will start from like thinking about like, do we have a pretty robust process? For example, do we get a chance to do research any type? And then also like the second thing is like, do we have like a way to concept together, right? What are some of the cadences? What are some of the activities we typically do? And of course, like the third one is, well, I mean, and then also like, what are some of the things that we can all agree on to create a playbook? I would say that's the first step aspect. The second one is based on that, do we have like existing tools and alignment on best practices? And do we have like a community or channel for team to learn together? Because I know like a lot of the times, like by having this type of channel platform, letting designers to coach each other is the best way to align on certain practice and best practices and start to radiate it. And of course, the third one, which is the last step, is once you have a pretty solid like a design process, and then you have like a pretty good, I would say, community and culture. And the third one is really that we can have work with the designers together to think about their growth, right? Like what's their individual plan, and then as the design leader, um, yourself, like you should be able to think about like these plan and then try to arrange your talent strategy holistically. All right, I know like Sandeep seems like this is the last question. I guess like thanks a lot for everyone and these amazing questions. Very happy and excited to share, and have a rest of your day.